Take it off. Now! The alien's demand pierces the dim alley, her neurodisruptor aimed squarely at Sergeant Peter Ramos's chest. Peter's back presses against the cold metal wall, his advanced combat suit suddenly feeling like a death sentence rather than protection. The Komar female before him, Flora she'd called herself, stands poised and lethal, her stunning features a mask of determination. Nexus Prime's twin moons cast long shadows across the urban sprawl, a frontier world caught between two galactic powers. For decades, humanity and the technologically superior Komar have circled each other like wary predators, their Cold War simmering on the edges of known space. Now, in this backstreet on a contested border planet, the conflict condenses to two individuals. Flora's eyes glitter with more than just the promise of scientific breakthrough. There's hunger there, curiosity that goes beyond reverse engineering classified human tech. Peter's mind races. The suit represents years of human innovation, a breakthrough that could tip the scales of this interstellar stalemate. To remove it means betraying everything he's sworn to protect. To refuse means certain paralysis or death at the hands of Flora's weapon. His fingers move to the first seal of his outer armor. Flora tenses, her grip on the neurodisruptor tightening. The air between them grows thick with tension and unspoken possibilities. A wail cuts through the night. Air raid sirens. Explosions bloom in the distance, shock waves rattling windows and shaking dust from crumbling walls. Flora's eyes widen in surprise. This attack wasn't part of her mission. "What?" she starts, but her words are drowned by a deafening blast. The building beside them shudders, debris raining down. In an instant, the dynamics shift. Predator and prey become potential allies against a greater threat. Peter grabs Flora's arm, yanking her away from a falling girder. They stumble together deeper into the alley, seeking shelter from the chaos erupting around them. The Komar assault force has launched its surprise attack, turning the human settlement into a war zone. As they huddle in a doorway, Flora's neurodisruptor forgotten at her side, Peter realizes the game has changed. The classified tech in his suit might be the key to repelling this invasion. But can he trust the alien spy pressed against him, her earlier threat now overshadowed by shared peril? Flora meets his gaze, fear and calculation warring in her expression. "Your people weren't prepared for this," she says, voice barely audible over the distant battles. Peter nods grimly. "Neither were you." He watches her closely, searching for any sign of duplicity. Is she truly as surprised as she seems? Or is this all part of a larger Komar plan? As the sky above them fills with streaking missiles and dropships, Peter knows his actions in the coming hours will shape far more than just his own fate. The human outpost, the balance of power on Nexus Prime, perhaps even the course of the interspecies conflict itself, all hang in the balance. With a deep breath, he makes his decision. We need to move. Now. He grabs Flora's hand, noting her momentary hesitation before she allows herself to be pulled along. Together, human soldier and alien spy plunge into the chaos of a world at war, their own conflict far from resolved. Peter's grip on Flora's hand tightened as they sprinted through the chaos-filled streets. Debris rained down around them, and the acrid smell of smoke filled the air. A nearby explosion sent them staggering, and Peter instinctively pulled Flora into the shelter of a crumbling doorway. "We can't stay out in the open," he shouted over the din of battle. His eyes scanned the area, landing on a dilapidated structure across the street. "There, that building might offer some protection." Flora nodded, her earlier hostility replaced by a look of stubborn persistence. They dashed across the rubble-strewn road, ducking as another explosion rocked the ground beneath their feet. Peter shouldered open the rusted door, and they stumbled into the darkness of the abandoned building. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the walls, casting eerie shadows across the debris-littered floor. Peter led them deeper into the structure, away from the windows and potential danger. "Here," he said, guiding Flora into a corner where two walls met. "This should provide some cover." No sooner had the words left his mouth than the building shook violently. The ceiling groaned, and a shower of plaster and concrete fragments rained down. Without hesitation, Peter threw himself over Flora, shielding her with his partially armored body. For a moment, they were pressed together in the darkness, the sound of their rapid breathing mingling with the distant rumble of explosions. Peter could feel the warmth of Flora's body beneath him, her heartbeat a rapid flutter against his chest. As the tremors subsided, Peter pulled back slightly, his eyes meeting Flora's in the dim light. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, surprise, perhaps even gratitude, that hadn't been there before. "You protected me," Flora said, her voice barely above a whisper. Peter nodded, suddenly acutely aware of their proximity. "Instinct, I guess," he replied, his voice gruff. A series of particularly loud explosions shook the building again, reminding them of the dire situation outside. Peter's mind raced, weighing his options. He knew his combat suit's advanced communications array could be the key to coordinating a counterattack, but using it would expose its capabilities to Flora. As another tremor rocked the building, Peter made his decision. He activated a hidden feature in his suit, sending out a distress signal to nearby human forces while simultaneously jamming Comar communications in the area. Flora's eyes widened as she noticed the subtle change in Peter's suit. "What are you doing?" she asked, a mix of curiosity and suspicion in her voice. "Calling for help," Peter replied tersely, his attention focused on the data streaming across his helmet's display, "and making sure your people can't call for theirs." Flora's expression hardened for a moment, then softened as she glanced at the chaos outside. "I understand," she said, her voice tinged with an emotion Peter couldn't quite identify. Minutes crawled by, filled with tense silence broken only by the sounds of distant battle. Then abruptly, the comm channel in Peter's suit crackled to life. "This is Captain Sarah Chen. We've received your distress signal and are inbound to your location. ETA 3 minutes. Hold tight, soldier." Relief washed over Peter, quickly followed by a new wave of tension. He looked at Flora, realizing he now faced another crucial decision. "Human forces are coming," he told her, watching her reaction carefully. "I need to know right now. Are you with me or against me?" Flora met his gaze, her expression a complex mix of emotions. After a moment that seemed to stretch for eternity, she spoke. "I'm with you, Peter. At least for now." Peter nodded, making his choice. When Captain Chen and her squad arrived, he introduced Flora as a civilian caught in the crossfire. Flora played along seamlessly, her acting skills impressively convincing. As Chen's squad secured the area, the captain briefed them on the larger situation. "The Comar attack isn't isolated. They're hitting multiple sectors. We need to evacuate to the underground bunkers immediately." They moved swiftly through the war-torn streets, dodging enemy fire and helping injured civilians along the way. Peter kept Flora close, hyper-aware of her presence amidst the chaos. As they reached the main human base, alarms blared and personnel rushed to and fro. Peter and Flora found themselves swept along with a group of civilians towards the evacuation elevators. In the crush of bodies, they were pushed into one of the elevators. As the doors closed, Peter realized with a jolt that they had been separated from Captain Chen and her squad. The elevator began its descent, creaking ominously with each floor it passed. Peter's combat training kept him alert, noting the increasing sounds of stress in the machinery. Suddenly, a violent shudder ran through the elevator. Metal screamed against metal, and the car lurched to a stop, trapped between floors. "Everyone stay calm," Peter called out, taking charge of the situation. But as he looked around, he realized with a start that he and Flora were alone in the elevator. The confined space seemed to shrink around them as the reality of their situation sank in. They were cut off from both the surface and the safety of the bunkers, trapped in a metal box that groaned with the threat of imminent failure. Flora's eyes met Peter's, fear and something else, something electric passing between them. As the elevator creaked and swayed, they found themselves pressed together, the heat of their bodies a stark contrast to the cold metal surrounding them. "We need to find a way out," Peter said, his voice low and urgent. He began examining the elevator's control panel, looking for any way to trigger an emergency release. Flora hesitated for a moment, then spoke. I might have something that can help." She reached into a hidden pocket, pulling out a small, sleek device of clearly alien design. "But using this, it would reveal who I really am to your sensors." Peter stared at the Comar tech in Flora's hand, then back at her face. The trust between them, fragile and new, hung in the balance. As the elevator groaned around them, Peter realized their survival, and perhaps something more, depended on the choice they were about to make. Peter's eyes darted between Flora's face and the alien device in her hand. The elevator shuddered again, metal groaning ominously around them. Time was running out. "Use it," he said, his voice firm despite the tension coursing through him. "We need to get out of here." Flora nodded, relief flashing across her features. She activated the device, which emitted a soft blue glow. The elevator's control panel sparked to life, displaying a holographic schematic of the shaft. "There," Flora pointed, her finger hovering over a maintenance hatch above them. "That's our way out." Peter wasted no time. He braced himself against the wall, lacing his fingers together to create a foothold. "I'll boost you up first," he said. Flora hesitated for a moment, then stepped into his hands. Peter lifted her, muscles straining against the weight of her body. As she reached for the hatch, he couldn't help but admire the graceful lines of her form, the way her body moved with fluid precision. With a grunt of effort, Flora pried open the hatch. She pulled herself through the opening, then reached back to help Peter. As he climbed, the tight space forced them into close contact. Peter could feel the warmth of her breath on his neck, the brush of her body against his, as he maneuvered through the opening. They found themselves in a narrow maintenance shaft, barely wide enough for a single person. Emergency lights cast a dim, reddish glow along the tunnel. The sounds of battle echoed faintly from above, a stark reminder of the chaos they'd left behind. As they began to move through the claustrophobic space, a high-pitched whine suddenly filled the air. Flora's eyes widened in alarm as she fumbled with the device she'd used earlier. "What's happening?" Peter asked, his body tensing instinctively. "It's my cloaking device," Flora explained, her fingers working frantically over the alien tech. "It masks my Comar biology from human scanners, but something's interfering with it. Perhaps damage from the attack." Peter's mind raced. If the device failed, Flora's true identity would be exposed to any human sensors in the area. He made a split-second decision. "Let me help," he said, reaching for the components of his combat suit. "I might be able to stabilize it with parts from my gear." Flora looked at him, surprise and gratitude mingling in her expression. She handed him the device, their fingers brushing in the process. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through Peter's body. Working in the confined space, their bodies pressed close. Peter and Flora manipulated the delicate technology. The intimacy of the moment was not lost on either of them. Peter could feel the soft puffs of Flora's breath on his cheek as she leaned in to examine his work. Just as they managed to stabilize the cloaking device, a massive explosion rocked the shaft. The tremor sent them both stumbling, and a deafening crash filled the air as a section of the tunnel collapsed between them. When the dust settled, Peter found himself cut off from Flora. A pile of debris separated them, leaving them able to hear each other but unable to reach one another. "Flora!" Peter called out, his heart pounding. "Are you all right?" "I'm okay," came her muffled reply, "but I can't get through. The debris is too heavy." As they worked to clear the rubble from opposite sides, Flora's voice came again, softer this time. "Peter, I need to tell you something, about why I'm really here." Peter paused in his efforts, sensing the weight of her words. "I'm listening," he said. Flora took a deep breath. "I was sent to gather intelligence on human military technology. My mission, it was to steal the secrets of your combat suit." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Peter remained silent, processing the information. "But meeting you," Flora continued, her voice wavering slightly, "it's made me question everything. The Comar cause, my loyalties. I'm not sure of anything anymore." Peter closed his eyes, his own conflicted emotions surging to the surface. After a moment, he spoke. "Flora, the human presence on Nexus Prime, it's not what you think. Our intentions are defensive, not aggressive. We're here to protect, not conquer." Their conversation was abruptly cut short by the sound of approaching footsteps and unfamiliar voices. Peter tensed, recognizing the guttural tones of the Komar language. "Flora," a deep voice called out. "This is Commander Zax. We're here to extract you. The mission is compromised. We must leave immediately." Peter's breath caught in his throat. Flora's superior officer was here, unaware of Peter's presence on the other side of the debris. The moment of truth had arrived. Flora's voice came again, but this time it was different. Steady, resolute. "Commander Zax, I'm afraid I can't leave yet. There's a human civilian trapped here with me. We need to get them out first." Peter's eyes widened in surprise. Flora had chosen to stay, to protect him. He heard the sound of Flora activating her cloaking device, likely creating a holographic disguise to fool Zax. As Zax's team began working to clear the debris, Peter knew he had to act fast. He spotted a computer terminal nearby and made his way towards it. If he could access the Komar attack plans, he might be able to turn the tide of the battle. His fingers flew over the keyboard, hacking into the system with practiced ease. As information flooded the screen, Peter's heart raced. He had found it, the location of the Komar command ship, and detailed attack plans. But using this information would put Flora in danger. Peter's mind worked furiously, trying to formulate a plan that could potentially end the conflict without compromising Flora's safety. The sound of shifting rubble grew louder. Zax's team was getting closer to breaking through. Peter knew his time was running out. He had to make a decision, and fast. With persistence, he began to implement his plan, the fate of two species hanging in the balance. As he worked, he could hear Flora maintaining her deception with the Komar rescue team, buying him precious time. The next few moments would determine everything: the outcome of the battle, the future of human-Komar relations, and the fragile connection that had formed between a human soldier and an alien spy. Spy. The weight of their shared secret hung heavy in the air. Peter's fingers flew across the keyboard, his mind racing as he accessed the human military's secure network through his combat suit's interface. The intelligence he had gathered about the Komar attack plans now became the cornerstone of a bold strategy. As he worked, he could hear Flora's voice on the other side of the debris, maintaining her deception with the Komar rescue team. Her words were calm and measured, but Peter detected a note of strain beneath the surface. "Just a little longer," he muttered, more to himself than to Flora. With a final keystroke, Peter activated a dormant human defense system, a network of orbital satellites equipped with electromagnetic pulse weapons. These hidden sentinels, invisible to Komar detection, began to power up, their targeting systems locking onto the coordinates of the Komar command ship. On the other side of the rubble, Flora's situation was growing increasingly precarious. The strain on her cloaking device was taking its toll, causing her holographic disguise to flicker and distort. Commander Zax's voice grew suspicious. "Flora, what's going on? Your image is unstable." Flora made a split-second decision. With a deep breath, she deactivated her disguise, revealing her true Komar form to Zax and his team. The sudden revelation sent a ripple of shock through the rescue party. "Commander," Flora said, her voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air, "I've uncovered critical information about a secret human weapon. If activated, it could devastate our forces." Zax's eyes narrowed, his hand hovering near his weapon. "Explain yourself, Agent." As Flora spun her improvised tale, Peter's combat suit beeped softly, indicating that the EMP satellites were in position. He quickly composed an encoded message containing the strike's exact timing and sent it to Flora's Komar communicator. Flora felt the subtle vibration of the incoming message. Without missing a beat in her explanation to Zax, she accessed the data. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly as she realized the truth behind her fabricated story. "Commander, we need to order an immediate retreat," Flora insisted, her voice urgent. "The humans have technological capabilities beyond our intelligence estimates. Continuing this attack would be suicide." Zax hesitated, clearly torn between his mission objectives and the warning from his most trusted operative. Before he could respond, a blinding flash illuminated the sky above Nexus Prime. The EMP strike hit with shocking force. The Komar command ship, caught utterly unprepared, lost power and began to drift aimlessly in orbit. On the ground, Komar weapons sputtered and died, leaving confused soldiers holding useless hunks of metal. In the chaos that followed, Peter finally managed to clear enough debris to squeeze through the opening. He emerged into the midst of the Komar rescue team, his combat suit systems still fully operational, thanks to its EMP-hardened design. Zax's team raised their weapons instinctively, but Flora stepped between them and Peter. "Wait," she called out. "This human has vital information. We need to hear him out." Peter and Flora locked eyes, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They stood shoulder to shoulder, united in their desire to end the conflict with minimal bloodshed. "Commander Zax," Peter addressed the Komar leader directly, "I'm Lieutenant Peter Halley of the Human Defense Force. I'm here to negotiate a ceasefire." Zax's antennae twitched with agitation. "Negotiate? You've crippled our forces." "We've demonstrated our capabilities," Peter countered, his voice firm but not aggressive. "But we've also shown restraint. That EMP could have been a far deadlier weapon. We don't want this war any more than you do." Flora nodded in agreement. "He's right, Commander. This is our chance to end this conflict before it escalates further. We need to order a full retreat and open diplomatic channels." The tension in the air was palpable as Zax considered their words. Around them, the sounds of battle had given way to an eerie silence, punctuated only by confused shouts and the occasional spark of malfunctioning equipment. Finally, Zax lowered his weapon. "Very well," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. "I'll relay the retreat order. But this isn't over, human. Our leaders will want answers." As the Komar forces began their withdrawal, Peter and Flora found themselves at the center of a potential diplomatic breakthrough. The immediate danger had passed, but the real challenge was just beginning. "What now?" Flora asked softly, her eyes meeting Peter's. Peter took a deep breath, acutely aware of the complexities that lay ahead. "Now," he said, "we build on this. We find a way forward for both our peoples." As they watched the Komar ships disappear into the sky, Peter and Flora stood close, their shoulders almost touching. The future was uncertain, filled with political minefields and the lingering specter of conflict. But in that moment, as Human and Komar stood side by side on the battlefield, there was also hope. Hope born from understanding, cooperation, and the unexpected connection between two individuals from different worlds. A moment of peace amidst the chaos. Their reverie was shattered by the sudden appearance of human military vehicles on the horizon. The rumble of engines and the glint of metal in the sunlight signaled the approach of the Human Defense Force. Peter tensed, instinctively stepping in front of Flora. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low and urgent. Flora placed a hand on his shoulder. "No," she replied firmly. "We face this together." As the human forces drew near, Commander Zax and his remaining troops formed a defensive line. The air crackled with tension, both sides poised on a knife's edge. General Marcus Steele, a stern-faced man with salt and pepper hair, stepped out of the lead vehicle. His eyes narrowed as he took in the scene before him. A human soldier standing alongside Komar troops. "Lieutenant Halley," Steele barked, "explain yourself." Peter took a deep breath and stepped forward. "General, sir, we have an opportunity here for peace. The Komar forces have agreed to a ceasefire. I propose an immediate meeting between our leadership and theirs to discuss terms." Steele's expression remained impassive, but his eyes flickered to Flora. "And who might this be?" Before Peter could respond, Flora stepped forward. "I am Flora, a Komar operative. I support Lieutenant Halley's proposal. This conflict need not continue." Commander Zax, sensing the delicacy of the moment, moved to stand beside Flora. "I concur," he said, his translator rendering his words in crisp English. "We are prepared to discuss terms." For a long moment, Steele said nothing. The only sound was the low hum of engines and the whisper of wind across the battle-scarred landscape. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. We'll convene at the neutral zone in 1 hour. Prepare your delegation, Commander." As both sides began to withdraw to prepare for the talks, Peter and Flora found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. Human and Komar alike looked to them for guidance, recognizing their unique position as a bridge between the two species. "We need to brief both sides," Peter said, running a hand through his hair. "Make sure everyone understands what's at stake." Flora nodded, her expression serious. Agreed. But Peter, we must be careful. Our connection, it could be seen as a liability by some. Peter's gaze softened as he looked at her. Or it could be our greatest asset. We understand each other in a way no one else does. That has to count for something. As they worked to prepare both delegations, the complexity of their task became increasingly apparent. Cultural misunderstandings and deeply held suspicions threatened to derail the process before it even began. When the time came, both parties converged on the designated neutral zone, a clearing at the edge of a dense forest. The human delegation arrived in armored vehicles, while the Komar descended in a sleek, organic-looking craft that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Peter and Flora stood between the two groups, acting as impromptu translators and cultural interpreters. As General Steele and Commander Zax began to outline their respective positions, Peter found himself constantly clarifying and contextualizing their words. When the commander speaks of territorial sovereignty, Peter explained to Steele, he's referring not just to physical space, but to the electromagnetic spectrum as well. The Komar consider it an extension of their physical territory. Flora, in turn, was busy explaining human concepts to Zax. The general's insistence on verifiable disarmament isn't meant as an insult. Humans place great value on concrete evidence in diplomatic agreements. As the talks progressed, Peter and Flora found themselves drawing closer, both physically and emotionally. The shared stress of their role and the intensity of the situation forged a bond between them that was impossible to ignore. During a brief recess, they found a moment alone. Hidden from view behind a cluster of strange alien flora, Peter turned to Flora, his eyes searching her face. Flora, he began, but words failed him. She reached up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I know, she whispered. Their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and urgent, a release of the tension that had been building between them since their first encounter. For a moment, the complexities of interspecies diplomacy faded away, leaving only the connection between two beings. The sound of approaching footsteps forced them apart. As they turned, they found themselves face to face with Dr. Alara Voss, a tall, elegant woman with piercing green eyes. Fascinating, Dr. Voss said, her gaze moving between Peter and Flora. I wondered if something like this might be possible. Peter stepped forward, his posture defensive. Dr. Voss, I can explain. She held up a hand, cutting him off. No need, Lieutenant. In fact, I believe you two may have just provided the key to lasting peace between our species. Flora's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Dr. Voss's eyes gleamed with excitement. I'm proposing a comprehensive study of human Komar compatibility, physiological, psychological, even romantic. Your relationship could be the foundation for a new era of understanding between our peoples. As the implications of Dr. Voss's words sank in, alarms began to blare from both the human and Komar encampments. A young soldier ran up, his face pale. Lieutenant Halley, we've detected a massive Komar fleet entering the system. They're on an attack vector. Peter and Flora exchanged a look of horror. All their work, all the progress they'd made, was about to be undone in an instant, as chaos erupted around them, with both human and Komar forces scrambling to battle stations. Peter grabbed Flora's hand. We can't let this happen, he said urgently. We have to do something. Flora nodded, her eyes blazing with perseverance. I have an idea, but it's risky. We'll need to get to my ship. Without another word, they slipped away from the negotiation site, leaving behind the shouts and alarms. As they ran towards Flora's hidden vessel, Peter's mind raced with the possibilities and dangers that lay ahead. They had one chance to prevent all-out war, one opportunity to prove that their bond was more than just a fleeting connection. As Flora's ship came into view, sleek and alien against the backdrop of the human colony, Peter realized that everything, the fate of two species, the future of the galaxy, and his relationship with Flora, now hinged on what they did next. As Flora's ship came into view, sleek and alien against the backdrop of the human colony, Peter realized that everything, the fate of two species, the future of the galaxy, and his relationship with Flora, now hinged on what they did next. We can't take my ship, Flora said, her voice tight with urgency. It's too recognizable. We need something that can slip past both human and Komar defenses. Peter nodded, his mind racing. I know just the thing. Follow me. They sprinted across the base, ducking behind equipment and dodging patrols. Peter led them to a small hangar tucked away at the edge of the compound. Inside sat a sleek, matte black shuttle barely large enough for 2 occupants. A stealth craft, Flora breathed, her eyes wide with appreciation. Peter grinned. Experimental tech, perfect for our needs. He placed his hand on the biometric scanner, and the shuttle's hatch hissed open. As they climbed inside, Peter's fingers flew over the controls, bypassing security protocols with practiced ease. I've got clearance, but they'll know it's us soon enough, he muttered. Flora leaned over his shoulder, her alien features illuminated by the glow of the console. Allow me, she said, her fingers dancing across the interface. Lines of code flashed across the screen, and suddenly the alarms fell silent. Peter raised an eyebrow. Impressive. Komar hacking skills, Flora replied with a smirk. Shall we? The shuttle lifted off smoothly, its stealth systems engaged. As they broke through the atmosphere, the vastness of space opened up before them. In the distance, they could see the pinpricks of light that marked the approaching Komar fleet. Inside the cramped cockpit, Peter became acutely aware of Flora's proximity. Her alien scent, a mix of something like cinnamon and ozone, filled his nostrils. He felt his heart rate increase, his skin tingling where their arms brushed against each other. Flora shifted in her seat, her breath coming faster. Peter, she said, her voice husky, I'm experiencing some unusual physiological responses. Are you? Yeah, Peter replied, swallowing hard. I think it's the close quarters. Our pheromones. Flora nodded, her eyes dilated. It seems human, and Komar biology is more compatible than we realized. The effect is intense. Peter forced himself to focus on the controls, trying to ignore the heat building between them. We need to stay on mission. The fleet. Right, Flora said, shaking her head as if to clear it. She turned to the sensors, her fingers trembling slightly as she worked. I'm detecting a massive ship at the center of the formation. It's the Celestial Harmony. Peter glanced at her, noting the tension in her voice. You know it? Flora's expression tightened. It's commanded by Grand Admiral Xylena, my mother. The revelation hung in the air between them, adding another layer of complexity to their already precarious mission. Peter reached out, squeezing Flora's hand briefly before returning to the controls. As they approached the Komar fleet, warning signals flashed across their console. Flora opened a communication channel, broadcasting on all frequencies in the musical language of the Komar. This is Flora, daughter of Grand Admiral Xylena. I come with crucial information regarding the conflict on Nexus Prime. Please, hold your fire and allow us to explain. For a tense moment, there was no response. Then a deep, resonant voice filled the cockpit. Flora, why should I believe this is not some human trick? Flora's eyes widened at the sound of her mother's voice. Because you know me, Mother. You know I would never betray our people. Please grant us an audience. The future of both our species depends on it. Another pause, this one stretching into what felt like eternity. Finally, Xylena spoke again. Very well. You have my curiosity, if not my trust. Dock with the Celestial Harmony. But be warned, any sign of deception, and you will be treated as enemies of the Komar people. As they maneuvered towards the massive Komar flagship, Peter and Flora exchanged a look. They were voluntarily walking into what could easily become a trap, with no guarantee of success or even survival. Are you ready for this? Peter asked softly. Flora's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through them both, a reminder of the connection that had brought them to this point. Together, she said, her voice filled with tenacity. The Celestial Harmony loomed before them, its bioorganic hull pulsing with otherworldly light. As their shuttle approached the docking bay, Peter and Flora steeled themselves for the confrontation to come. The fate of 2 worlds rested on their shoulders, and the clock was ticking. The docking clamps engaged with a soft thud, and the shuttle's hatch opened to reveal a contingent of armed Komar guards. Their insectoid features were impassive, but the weapons in their hands spoke volumes. Peter and Flora stepped out, hands raised in a universal gesture of peace. The guards surrounded them immediately, ushering them through the ship's organic corridors. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent light, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that set Peter's nerves on edge. As they approached the command center, Flora's steps faltered. Peter glanced at her, noting the mix of anticipation and dread on her face. Before he could offer any words of comfort, the doors slid open, revealing the imposing figure of Grand Admiral Zelana. The resemblance between mother and daughter was unmistakable. Zelana's carapace shimmered with iridescent hues, her compound eyes fixing them with an inscrutable gaze. The tension in the room was palpable as she stepped forward, her attention focused solely on Flora. "Explain yourself, daughter," Zelana's voice resonated through the chamber. "Why do you stand with this human while our forces prepare for battle?" Flora straightened her posture, drawing strength from Peter's presence beside her. "Mother, the situation on Nexus Prime has changed. We have an opportunity for peace, but we must act now before it's too late." As Flora launched into her explanation, detailing the events on the planet's surface and the potential for a diplomatic solution, Peter found himself searching the faces of the Komar officers. Some looked skeptical, others curious, but all were listening intently. He stepped forward, adding his voice to Flora's. "Grand Admiral, I'm Lieutenant Peter Halley of the Human Defense Force. I can confirm everything Flora has told you. Our peoples don't have to be enemies. We've seen firsthand the potential for cooperation, for understanding between our species." Zelana's antennae twitched, a sign of agitation or interest. Peter couldn't be sure. "And why should we trust the word of a human soldier? How do we know this isn't some elaborate deception?" Before Peter could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. A Komar officer rushed to a console, their movements frantic. "Grand Admiral, the Human Defense Fleet has mobilized. They're on an intercept course." The command center erupted into a flurry of activity. Officers shouted orders, tactical displays flickered to life, and the ship hummed as weapon systems came online. In the midst of the chaos, Peter caught Flora's eye. They had come too far to fail now. Taking a deep breath, Peter raised his voice above the din. "Grand Admiral Zelana, there's something you need to know about our defensive capabilities." All eyes turned to him as he revealed the existence of the EMP weapon that had disabled the Komar forces on Nexus Prime. He explained its potential for widespread devastation, but also offered to share the technology as part of a peace agreement. The revelation sent shockwaves through the command center. Zelana's eyes narrowed, reassessing the tactical situation in light of this new information. Flora seized the moment, stepping forward with passion in her voice. "Mother, imagine a future beyond this conflict, a joint mission between humans and Komar, exploring the galaxy together. Peter and I have seen what's possible when our species work as one. We could be the start of something unprecedented, a true interspecies alliance." The idea hung in the air, tantalizing in its possibilities. Peter watched as Zelana's expression shifted, calculations and considerations playing out behind her alien eyes. The human fleet drew ever closer, the tactical displays showing the narrowing window before conflict became inevitable. The fate of both species balanced on a knife's edge, with Zelana's decision holding the power to tip the scales toward war or peace. As the tension reached a fever pitch, Peter felt Flora's hand slip into his. Despite the gravity of the situation, he couldn't help but be acutely aware of her touch, of the chemistry between them that defied the boundaries of their species. Grand Admiral Zelana's gaze locked onto their joined hands, her antennae quivering with an unreadable emotion. The future of two worlds hung in the balance as she opened her mandibles to speak. Speak. The command center fell silent, all eyes fixed on the Grand Admiral as she considered the fate of two species. "Stand down," Zelana said, her voice carrying the weight of command. "Halt our advance." A collective gasp rippled through the Komar officers. Flora's antennae quivered with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Mother," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zelana's compound eyes focused on Flora and Peter, still holding hands. "Your words have merit, daughter. And you, human. Your offer of technological exchange is intriguing. She turned to her communications officer. Open a channel to the human fleet. I wish to speak with their commander. As the officer scrambled to comply, Zelana addressed Peter and Flora. You two have given us a chance for peace. Now, prove your worth. You will organize a summit between our peoples. Peter nodded, his grip on Flora's hand tightening. We won't let you down, Grand Admiral. Within hours, Peter and Flora found themselves aboard a neutral space station orbiting Nexus Prime. They worked tirelessly, transforming the station into a suitable venue for the historic meeting between humans and Komar. As they prepared a conference room, Peter couldn't help but notice the way Flora's carapace shimmered under the station's lights. The close quarters intensified the effect of their pheromones, making it difficult to focus on the task at hand. Flora seemed equally affected, her movements becoming more fluid, almost dance-like, as she arranged seating for the delegates. Peter, she said, her voice husky, I'm finding it increasingly challenging to maintain professional detachment. Peter swallowed hard, forcing himself to look away from the enticing curve of her neck. I know, but we have to stay focused. The future of our species depends on this meeting. They continued their work, their bodies gravitating towards each other unconsciously. As Flora reached past Peter to adjust a holographic display, her arm brushed against his chest. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through them both. Flora, Peter began, but he was interrupted by a beeping from his communicator. Lieutenant Halley, came the gruff voice of General Marcus Steele, commander of the human forces. Status report. Peter cleared his throat, stepping away from Flora. The station is nearly ready, sir. We await your arrival. As Peter concluded his report, Flora's antennae twitched. Peter, look at this, she said, gesturing to a section of wall paneling that seemed out of place. Together they examined the panel, discovering a hidden latch. With a soft hiss, a concealed door slid open, revealing a chamber filled with artifacts of unknown origin. What is this? Peter breathed, stepping into the room. Flora followed, her compound eyes wide with wonder. These symbols, they're a mix of ancient human and Komar script. But how is that possible? Before they could investigate further, the station's intercom crackled to life. Attention! Human and Komar delegations arriving. All personnel report to your designated areas. Exchanging a meaningful look, Peter and Flora reluctantly left the chamber, sealing it behind them. They would have to unravel its mysteries later. As the delegates arrived, tension filled the air. Humans and Komar eyed each other warily, centuries of conflict evident in their guarded postures and suspicious glances. Peter and Flora found themselves at the center of attention, their unique relationship making them a bridge between the two species. They moved between the groups, facilitating introductions and easing communication. During a break in the proceedings, Dr. Alara Voss, a human xenobiologist, approached them. I've been meaning to discuss a proposed compatibility study with you two, she began, but her words trailed off as she noticed the intensity of their gazes. Perhaps another time, Dr. Voss murmured, backing away discreetly. Left alone in a quiet corner of the station, Peter and Flora found themselves drawn together, the culmination of tension, stress, and attraction, impossible to ignore. Peter, Flora whispered, her antennae quivering, I don't think I can resist this any longer. Peter's hand cupped her face, his thumb tracing the delicate edge of her carapace. Then don't, he said, pulling her close. Their kiss was a fusion of alien and familiar, soft lips meeting chitinous mouthparts in a dance of discovery and desire. As they embraced, their bodies molding together in ways that defied their physiological differences, neither noticed Dr. Voss observing from afar, her scientific curiosity overriding her sense of propriety. When they rejoined the negotiations, the change in their demeanor was palpable. Both humans and Komar noticed the shift, reactions ranging from intrigue to discomfort. The talks reached a critical point as the discussion turned to technology exchange. Peter, drawing on his experience and newfound connection with Flora, proposed a solution. A joint scientific committee, he suggested, his voice carrying across the room. Led by representatives from both species, we can oversee the gradual exchange of technology, ensuring it's used for the benefit of all. Flora stepped forward, her stance mirroring Peter's. We volunteer to lead this initiative. Our unique perspective can bridge the gap between our peoples. As the delegates considered this proposal, alarms suddenly blared throughout the station. Panicked voices filled the comm channels. "We're under attack," shouted a security officer. "Multiple breaches detected. Human and Komar signatures." Peter and Flora exchanged alarmed glances. The peace they had fought so hard to achieve was now under threat from within. "Everyone, stay calm," Peter called out, taking charge of the situation. "We need to secure the delegates and find a safe zone." Flora nodded, her antennae twitching as she assessed the danger. "I'm detecting multiple intruders converging on our location. We don't have much time." As chaos erupted around them, Peter and Flora stood united, ready to defend not only their love, but the future of human-Komar relations. The station shuddered under the assault, and the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors. The true test of their bond and the fragile peace between their species was about to begin. The true test of their bond and the fragile peace between their species was about to unfold. Peter's military instincts kicked in as he surveyed the chaotic scene. "We need to secure the delegates," he shouted over the blaring alarms. "Flora, can you sense where the intruders are coming from?" Flora's antennae twitched rapidly, her compound eyes scanning the room. Multiple hostiles approaching from the east and west corridors. We're surrounded. Without hesitation, Peter took charge. "Everyone, move to the central hub. It's the most defensible position." He turned to the security personnel, a mix of humans and Komar. "Form a perimeter around the delegates. We'll hold them off there." As they hurried through the station's sleek corridors, Peter and Flora worked in tandem, their movements perfectly synchronized. Flora's enhanced senses allowed her to detect approaching threats, while Peter's combat training guided their defensive maneuvers. They reached the central hub, a large circular room with multiple entry points. Peter quickly organized the security forces, positioning them strategically around the room. "Remember," he called out, "we're fighting alongside each other now, not against each other. Watch your fellow guards' backs, regardless of species." The first wave of attackers burst through the doors, a mix of human and Komar extremists wielding an array of weapons. Peter and Flora sprang into action, their recent intimacy translating into an uncanny ability to anticipate each other's moves. As Peter ducked to avoid a plasma blast, Flora's leg swept out, knocking the attacker off balance. In the same fluid motion, Peter rose, disarming the fallen extremist with a precise strike. "Behind you!" Flora called out. Peter dropped to one knee, allowing Flora to vault over him, her sharp claws catching an approaching Komar militant across the face. The battle raged on, with Peter and Flora at the center, a whirlwind of human and Komar combat techniques seamlessly blended. Their example inspired the other guards, who began to work together more effectively, overcoming years of ingrained hostility. In a moment of respite, Dr. Alara Voss approached them, her eyes wide with excitement despite the chaos. "Lieutenant Halley, Flora, I have a theory that might help us end this conflict quickly." Peter raised an eyebrow, ducking as a stray shot whizzed overhead. "We're all ears, Doctor, but make it quick." Voss spoke rapidly, her words tumbling out in a rush of scientific jargon. "I observed your encounter earlier. The biochemical reaction between your species is unique. I believe we can weaponize it as a non-lethal method to incapacitate the attackers." Flora's antenna perked up with interest. "Explain." "If we release a mixture of your pheromones into the station's air circulation, it could disorient the human attackers and calm the Komar militants," Voss explained. "It's risky, but it might be our best chance to end this without further bloodshed." Peter and Flora exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. Peter nodded. "We'll do it. How do we proceed?" Voss pointed to a nearby access panel. "That leads to the life support systems. You'll need to manually release the pheromone mixture into the air ducts." "Cover us!" Peter shouted to the security team as he and Flora made their way to the panel. Working together, they pried it open and squeezed into the narrow maintenance shaft beyond. The close quarters intensified their awareness of each other. As they crawled through the cramped space, Peter couldn't help but notice the way Flora's carapace shimmered in the dim light, the memory of their earlier intimacy fresh in his mind. They reached the central air circulation unit, a massive tangle of pipes and filters. Flora's dexterous appendages made quick work of the control panel while Peter stood guard. "Ready," Flora announced. "But Peter, are you sure about this? We don't know what effect this might have on us." Peter took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We've come this far together. Whatever happens, we face it as one." With a nod, Flora activated the system. A fine mist began to spray into the air ducts, quickly dispersing throughout the station. The effect was almost immediate. As they made their way back to the central hub, they encountered dazed human attackers, their eyes unfocused and movements uncoordinated. The Komar militants they passed seemed lethargic, their usual aggressive stance replaced by a docile demeanor. Emerging into the hub, Peter and Flora found the scene transformed. The fighting had ceased, replaced by a surreal tableau of confusion and calm. Human extremists sat on the floor, giggling or staring in wonder at their surroundings, while their Komar counterparts stood motionless, antennae drooping in a state of deep relaxation. "It worked," Dr. Voss exclaimed, her face flushed with excitement. "The pheromone mixture is having the exact effect I hypothesized." Peter and Flora shared a triumphant smile, but their victory was short-lived. From the far side of the room, two figures emerged, apparently unaffected by the pheromone cloud. "The leaders," Flora hissed, recognizing the human colonel and Komar high priest who headed the extremist faction. Peter stepped forward, his stance protective. "It's over," he called out. "Your forces are neutralized. Surrender now, and we can end this peacefully." The human colonel sneered, raising his weapon. "Peace? There can be no peace between our species. We are too different, too—" His words were cut short as Flora suddenly moved, her body interposing itself between Peter and the colonel. "Look at us," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "A human and a Komar, fighting side by side. We are living proof that cooperation is possible." The Komar high priest's antennae twitched, his compound eyes focusing on Peter and Flora's intertwined hands. This is unprecedented," he muttered, his tenacity visibly wavering. Peter seized the moment. "We've seen the best of both our species today. Imagine what we could accomplish together, exploring the galaxy as allies instead of enemies." A tense silence fell over the room as the extremist leaders considered their words. The fate of human-Komar relations hung in the balance, with the potential for renewed conflict or lasting peace resting on this crucial moment.
If you finish this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.